Name of subject internal combustion engines. Name of chapter SI engines fuel supply system, ignition system, combustion. Name of topic Magneto ignition system. Contents Magneto ignition system. So dear friends, in the last video, as we discussed about the battery ignition system. So now in this video, we are going to discuss another very important type of ignition system. Its name is the magneto ignition system. So with the help of this particular diagram, you can understand the basic difference between the battery ignition and the magneto ignition system. So in this case, we are not going to use any kind of a battery for the ignition purpose. But instead of battery, the battery is replaced by a magnets, or sometimes we can say the rotating magnets, as well as a rotating magnets of two pole. Okay, so in this case, we are again not using any kind of a ignition coil. Instead of ignition coil, here we are having this particular thing where the amount of, or what we can say, where the primary winding and secondary winding is wounded, and in between this there is always a rotating magnet which is having a north and south pole. Okay, so before going to understand the working principle, we will discuss the different elements as well as the construction of the magneto ignition system. So again, here we have the condenser or capacitor which is connected over here. So here is that particular contact breaker which is present over here. Now this is the ignition switch. Okay, so here is the rotating cam. Once it will be rotated, and generally it is useful to make the contact and to break the contact for the connection. So here is that rotating magnet which consisting the south pole and the north pole, and it will always rotating in this particular what we can say that iron core, which is having the two windings. This dotted line indicates the secondary winding, and this thick line indicates the primary winding. So as I told you earlier, the number of turns are more in the case of secondary winding, and the number of turns are less in the case of the primary winding. So the copper wires are wounded over here, and that is called the woundings. Okay, so in this case, this particular thing is again connected with this distributor rotor. So here is the distributor, and here is that particular distributor rotor. Again, here we have the number of spark plugs for number of for the different cylinder. Suppose again there is a 4-cylinder engine, so spark plug 1, 2, 3, 4, which is present inside the each and every engine cylinder. Okay, so the main function of a distributor is again same as the current will come inside the distributor system. The particular distributor always rotates, and current jumps from the distributor point to that particular distributor contact points of that respective spark plug. So because of the air gap, the voltage jumps from the rotor to that particular spark plug, and spark plug is able to supply the amount of ignition inside the engine cylinder. So working principle is again same, but here we are not using the ignition coil as well as the battery. So how this will work? So this is again very important. So in this case, again, initially, when we are going to start the vehicle, that time again ignition switch will be there. So as we rotate that ignition switch, as we rotate the key, that time there should be always contact. So as it will be contacted over here, that time the magnet will start to rotate because of the cam. So as the cam will rotate, the cams rotate the magnet. So the north and south pole will start to rotate inside this particular iron kind of a core, which consisting the primary and secondary winding. So what will happen? The EMF will be induced because of the rotation of the magnet over here. So as the magnets will rotate, the EMF will be induced, and there will be a generation in the voltage, we can say. The electricity will be generated in the form of voltage, and that will supplied from that particular windings, initially primary and then from the secondary, and we can able to increase the voltage again from very low to very high. Then it could supply to the distributor system, and the further things will be happen. The distributor rotates, and it will supply the required amount of voltage to each and every spark plug. So in this case, again, what is the role of contact breaker? So as I said you earlier, as the continuous current generated, there will be huge amount of voltage will be generated, and there will be a chances of the failure of the system because of the huge amount of heat. And to reduce that, to eliminate that, or we can say to avoid that, we have to use the contact breaker. So as the cam rotate, there will be always in the contact breaks. As the contact breaks, then instead of current supplying from this side, that time the amount of current will supplied from this direction to the capacitor. Okay, so please concentrate on my statement. Initially, as the continuously voltage generating from the rotating magnets, and that huge amount of voltage in the form of current supplied to the distributor system, and distributor rotates, is able to supply that particular voltage to each and every spark plug. And according to the firing order, the spark plug is able to supply the amount of ignition inside the engine cylinder. But to avoid that particular huge temperature or the heat inside this particular system, we have to use the contact breaker. So as contact breaker works, that time it breaks the contact over here, it breaks the contact over here, we can say it breaks the contact from the amount of voltage supplying from these particular windings to the distributor. And that time whatever current which will generating from this particular system, that will revert back to the capacitor or the condenser. So as I told you earlier, capacitor or condenser is self-charging devices. So it takes some amount of voltage and it charges itself, and then again it will resupply the amount of voltage in the very high amount of voltage, and then it will supplied over here, and then again it will send to the distributor system. So this particular system will work. Okay, so again to understand this particular concept in well manner, we will see one informative video, and this will again helpful to understand the concept of this particular magneto ignition system itself. So please watch the video thoroughly.
Explain the essential parts and working of a magneto ignition system. We know that in a battery ignition system, a battery is used for supplying voltage to the primary circuit, and an ignition coil is used to step up this voltage when required. In a magneto ignition system, the battery and ignition coil are replaced by a compact magneto. The basic components of the magneto ignition system are magneto, contact breaker, condenser, ignition switch, distributor, spark plug leads, and spark plug. Here, all the parts except the magneto are same as in battery ignition system. The function of magneto is to induce current in the primary and secondary circuit. It consists of two-pole magnet, a soft iron core, on which both primary and secondary coil winding is done. As the magnet rotates, current is produced in both primary and secondary windings. Magneto can be either of rotating magnet type or rotating armature type. Here, we are using the rotating magnet type magneto. Now let's try to understand the working of magneto ignition system. When the magnet starts rotating, the magnetic field changes through the soft iron core. This continuous change in the magnetic field induces a varying voltage in both primary and secondary windings, which produces an alternating current. The magnet is connected directly to a cam, which is timed in such a way that as the current in the primary winding reaches the maximum value, the breaker points on the contact breaker opens. As the breaker point opens, current now flows through the condenser and starts charging it. Thus, current in the primary winding decreases to zero and varies the induced magnetic field. Then the condenser starts to discharge rapidly into the primary circuit, which reverses the direction of primary current and the induced magnetic field. This rapid collapse and reversal of the direction of magnetic field induces a very high voltage in the secondary winding, which is then carried through high tension wires to the distributor rotor, where it is passed to one of the spark plug leads into the spark plug, where a spark is produced. Now, did you notice the difference in the locations of ignition switch in both the ignition systems? We can see that in magneto ignition system, the ignition switch is not connected in series with the primary circuit, but in parallel to the condenser. This is because in the magneto ignition system, the ignition switch is closed to stop the engine. As the ignition switch is closed, the primary circuit gets short-circuited, which prevents the rapid breakdown in the magnetic field and thus prevents the high voltage from being induced in the secondary circuit. Now let's summarize the working of the magneto ignition system as.
So hope you understood the things clearly with the help of this particular video itself. So thank you so much for watching this particular video of the magneto ignition system. So thanks a lot.